like me, you take a more conservative view on these global institutions, you will have loved it. More of that. Beluga whale. Yes, it's not April the 1st. Beluga whale spotted swimming off Gravesend. And Sir Keir Starmer at the Labour Party conference goes completely rogue and utters a line that was not in the pre-cleared speech, where he talks about Labour perhaps going for the option of remaining in the European Union. Not something Jeremy Corbyn is going to be very pleased about. His big speech, of course, coming tomorrow. But the story that really interests today is one about a completely fundamental change of policy in this country, and one, on the face of it, that pleases me. You see, since 2003, I have been campaigning, saying that it is utterly ridiculous that we have a total open door in terms of people coming here to work and live and bring their families from Europe, and yet we make it very much more difficult for those from the rest of the world to come. I've been arguing that immigration actually should not discriminate in favour of those from the European Union, and that our future immigration policy should be based on skills. And I've argued that year on year on year. I have been called all the names under the sun for doing it, from Tony Blair onwards. But how interesting that last night the Cabinet met and they have agreed that in future they will put this new principle into place, that the immigration rules will be the same from those who come from all over the world as they are for those who come from within the European Union once we've achieved Brexit, and that the emphasis should be on skills. This, of course, follows the recommendations of the Independent Migration Advisory Committee, which issued its report a couple of weeks ago. The Labour Party, thus far, have said nothing against it. On the face of it, I should be completely over the moon. There are a couple of caveats, one being that maybe there'll be special protection for EU citizens as part of a trade deal that we do. The other being that the definition of who is high-skilled has changed, because at the moment, to be high-skilled, you have to have a degree level or equal vocational training in a subject, and that'll be dropped to A-level standard or equal vocational training. So, depending how the government implements this, we could finish up with fewer people coming into the UK every year, which I think was one of the things the Brexit vote was about. Equally, if they make it easier and easier for what is defined as high-skilled, there could be even more coming. But if they stick to what they agreed last night, and let's assume, for the basis of this debate tonight, I won't pour any cold water over it, let's assume that this is a fundamental change. Once we have Brexit, immigration rules will be the same, regardless whether you come from India, Australia, or Belgium, or Romania. Exactly the same for non-EU citizens as it is for EU citizens. And I'm asking you, is the government right to end discrimination in favour of EU citizens? And from me, that gets an absolutely decisive yes. And it's the Cabinet saying, in future, we're going to think of ourselves as a global nation and not as a European one. If you agree with that view, please call 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think the answer is no, that EU citizens deserve special status post-Brexit. And by the way, that's not the ones here already, because that's taken as a given. They came here legally into this country. We are not a banana republic. We will not revoke their rights. But if you think, no, actually, they're our next-door neighbours, they're an important trading partner, if you think, actually, this is wrong and we should have special provisions for EU citizens, then please text to 84850. Or maybe you've got even more radical thoughts on immigration than myself or the government, in which case please tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and of course Facebookers, you can watch us live and you can comment there too, as you do in great numbers. Let's go straight to the public. You know where I stand on this. Where does Jerry, a new caller from Romford, stand? Jerry, good evening.
Hi, how are you? And no, pleasure to speak to you.
We're struggling with your line, Jerry. Hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
Right.
It's a pleasure to speak to you, Nigel. It's my first time, but I'm a very big admirer of you, and you're doing great work getting the Brexit vote through, and that was brilliant.
Well, thank you.
I'm the same mind as you. I happen to be married to an African woman.
Yes.
A lot of my kids are in Africa, but would like to, at some stage, be educated and be eligible to work in the UK. Why not? Now, why should people from the Commonwealth and that are highly skilled, highly educated, be discriminated against because geographically they're in a different location than Europeans who can walk into this country unskilled, no border checks, no nothing, just walk in. They can be a beggar, a pauper, anything, and they still can come in here and live in this country. I don't think that's fair. I think that's totally discriminate against a lot of highly skilled African people who are good nurses, good doctors, good engineers, and so on and so forth, that have to go through what they try to do in the immigration system is try to keep you out at any cost with very high bonds, very high amount of deposits, the way people that want to come can't come because they don't have the money.
I mean, Jerry, they had to do that because the flood of people that came from Europe was so much bigger than anybody, especially Mr. Blair's government, anticipated. Now, Jerry, you've made the case very, very well. And could I just add, you made the point about people with high skills, people with good education, but also, Jerry, very, very important, I hope you'll agree, that people that come will integrate into our society.
I agree 100%, because if you look at it, where did the UK get their wealth from? They got it from the Commonwealth. They didn't get it from Europe. We only joined Europe in 1974. And this was Great Britain before we joined Europe, not after we joined Europe.
No. So, Jerry, it's a step in the right direction. I thank you very much for your call and your very clear analysis. Richard's another new caller. He lives in High Wycombe. Good evening, Richard.
Oh, good evening, Nigel.
Welcome. So, Richard,
is
this
for a while?
Thank you. Is this progress, Richard?
As your previous caller, I want to thank you.
Well, thank you.
Without you, we wouldn't have had this vote. And I'm just cheesed off with people trying to.
I know, and we'll debate that another day. But I'm trying.
But no, I want to agree with your other chap, because at the end of the day, we've had. There was a case not very long ago, wasn't it? Was it Australia? We had an Australian couple or something that. I think were they in Scotland, and they had to go back. But the thing is, I think really, as your previous caller, we have far more in common with Commonwealth countries. And what I don't agree with is that you can have like an Indian doctor or nurse or somebody with skills like that, which and then you can have somebody from Eastern Europe walk in without any skills whatsoever, and they have preference over an Indian doctor.
Yeah. And I think your point, Richard, I think your point about the Commonwealth is actually a very, very powerful one. There is an incredibly strong emotional bond between this country and many Commonwealth countries. We're the only country in the history of mankind, as I can see it, that has good relationships with its former colonies. It's a remarkable family, the Commonwealth, isn't it?
Well, it certainly is. And at the end of the day, where I live in a village just a little way outside, and I can tell you, in the driveways up where we are, we've got loads of Mercedes and everything. Anyway, well, I know we're not on that subject, but that'll be for another time. But no, I've got to stick to the point.
You have?
I do think,
absolutely.
But I do think... I do think it is a long time coming, but the thing is, how long does it take people to listen to, the establishment in particular?
Well, it takes a long time, but actually, I do feel, Richard, a sense of vindication. I have received huge amounts of abuse for saying, number one, immigration should be skills-based. Number two, people that come, we should be confident can integrate. And, of course, number three, we should not discriminate in favour of EU citizens. So I'm feeling quite happy about this, Richard. Richard, I thank you. I'm going to move on. I have a full switchboard. Yes, Nigel. I feel more affinity with our Commonwealth brethren than many parts of Europe. India, for example, before partition, provided the biggest volunteer army ever known to man. Graham, you are absolutely, entirely right. And in both world wars, those that came from what we now call the Commonwealth, then the Empire, constituted about 40% of our effective forces in both world wars, and not one of them was a conscripted man. It's a remarkable part of our history that very few people know. I'm going to Bolton to speak to Steve. Steve, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Good, mate. Totally agree with the stance. It's essential for the country. we should be opening our doors for workforce to the whole world rather than just a small corner of it and restricting what's available to us. And I've got a construction company, and I know in construction there's a huge shortfall of labour available, and as that industry is growing, we just can't keep up with the lads on site. There's not enough of them. So if I want a bricklayer, for example, from Brazil, why can't I take him on? I can take one from Belgium, why can't one from Brazil?
Steve, I get the logic of that totally, but could I just say this to you as somebody in construction? Isn't it about time we started training our own people?
Yep, 100%.
Because, I mean, it's as if we've gone for this cheap labour model, we've become the cheap labour capital of the Western world, and we encourage our 18-year-olds to go to university, to build up debt, to get degrees that don't teach them trades in any way at all. I just can't believe it, Steve.
Absolutely, and that's been an issue for maybe the last generation insofar that if you're 14, 15 years old and academically you're not brilliant, you're never going to be a brain surgeon. That doesn't mean to say you're a loss to society. I've got lads work for me, can't read and write very well, but they could strip a plant and machinery down with a spoon and put it back together again.
Yeah.
They are talented. Just because they've not got the academic skills doesn't mean to say that they're no use to anybody.
Absolutely.
So
I agree. And yet somehow, Steve, we've got this sort of strange inverted snobbery in this country against people learning trades and skills.
Exactly. And it's ridiculous. I've got a couple of apprentices work for me, 18, 19-year-old. They're probably the richest lads in their town because the money that they're bringing home, they're still living home. The disposable income they've got is far greater than any of their friends who are at college and at uni. And there's like, why didn't someone come into my school when I was 14 and 15 and tell everybody else about it? The schools don't want to do it. The academic environment doesn't want to do it. They want to keep them into uni till they're 23, 24 and then spit them out with a second class.
I know. Well, listen, those two lads that work for you, who've got lots of money to spend in Bolton on Saturday nights, good for them is all I can say. Steve, I thank you. Now, a word of caution. So far, we've had 3 callers all saying great, but a word of caution on Twitter. The government has downgraded what compromises as skilled. It has, I mentioned that earlier. So we just end up with plumbers and builders from the whole world, not just the EU. And that is, and you're right, that is the risk of this. I welcome this policy. I think we should end discrimination in favour of people from the European Union. We should go global. I think it may well improve our relationship with much of the Commonwealth. But we must not allow this correct policy to allow the numbers, which are vast already, to go up. They need to come down a bit because at the moment, frankly, they are not sustainable. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive on LBC, and it is now 6:15. The Cabinet agree a change of policy. We're going to end discrimination in favour of EU citizens and open ourselves up to the world, everybody to be treated equally. The principle I cheer to the rooftops. It needs to be applied properly, obviously. Now, it's day 2 proper of the Labour conference in Liverpool. Today's star attraction, Shadow Brexit Secretary Sir Keir Starmer, spoke earlier on today and surprised everybody because he went off script. He'd prepared his speech and he'd had it passed by the party officials and everybody was happy as Larry, and then this happened.
It's right that Parliament has the first say. But if we need to break the impasse, our options must include campaigning for a public vote, and nobody is ruling out Remain as an option.
Do you hear those cheers? Do you see the direction the Labour Party's going in? I've been talking about this for months here on LBC. This is becoming a London, or particularly North London, Labour Party. Just look at where the prominent MPs come from and where they represent, and they are very much of a Remain persuasion. It is a huge rift that is opening up here. It's a rift, actually, to be honest, with Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell. They've been trying to slow down this march of the Labour Party towards a strong pro-EU, a strong Remain position. But I think Keir Starmer today, Sir Keir laid it out there very, very clearly indeed. His critics say it was an open leadership bid by Starmer, knowing that the party membership now are so pro-European Union. They may or they may not be right, but I tell you what, it's going to do them a huge amount of harm in the country. I think this is perhaps the biggest mistake Labour have made for decades in terms of misjudging their own voters. Paul sends me a message by SMS. He says, after watching the complete and utter power-mad Starmer, who went above his party and voters, I would never vote Labour again. There's a lot of people like that. I heard them on Eddie's show as well earlier. There's a lot of people feeling like that. Theresa May, in front of you, there's an open goal. There's no goalkeeper in it. It's really easy peasy. All you have to do is chuck checkers, show the people of this country that you want a free trade deal or WTO, and if you do that and call a snap election, you, even with your relatively limited campaigning ability, would win a big majority. Labour have made a big mistake. Back to ending discrimination in favour of EU citizens. I think it's absolutely right. What does Mark, a new caller from Dublin, make of it? Good evening, Mark.
Hello, Nigel. Nice to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. So what do you think?
I see this there's a potential problem here, and I've seen it it's exposed in Dublin, where multinational companies or big companies would employ people with substandard qualifications. Now, it doesn't matter where, they don't seem to vet it. The target is to get a visa is around €30,000 a year. If you can justify this skilled worker is going to be paid more than that, they give you that. Now, to get, for example, a Java programmer in Ireland or in Europe, that's going to cost an awful lot more than that. So they think, okay, we'll look to these other places, and they get someone with a qualification from the Institute of Technology of the Sandwich Islands. They come in because they know they don't need
the Sandwich Islands. Okay.
The most easy place,
Okay, sorry, keep going.
But you know, they know their job doesn't require that high level of a skill base, but they know anyone locally is going to cost an awful lot more. Or anyone, even if they went to, I don't know, the University of Beijing, would they get a really technical person? They're going to be too high level. They just need someone to click boxes and do this particular role, and they'd rather go to these places, and that's where it falls down. So when they vet and offer these visas, are they going to be vetting the qualifications? Are they going to see, is this a serious institution that this skilled person is coming from? Is it a credible institution?
Well, Mark, all I can say to that is, and Linda says on SMS to me, we need an Australian-type immigration system. You know, the Australians do check this stuff. The Australians do make sure people have the right qualifications. They then, of course, decide how many to let in, which is, a sort of the follow-on argument to it. Mark, I do understand your point about substandard qualifications. That would be important. But there are some that would argue there are countries within the European Union whose standards aren't quite the same as ours.
Yes, but to be honest, as much as I'm pro leaving the European Union like yourself, some of the Polish and all these other nationalities that come in, they have been very technical, and there is a certain standard there. I will take, and I will accept that. And
one thing that's really important to say is that a lot of people who have come to this country from the European Union have been excellent people, all right? There's no question about that. Excellent people, very hard workers in many cases, and all the rest of it. The problem has been, Mark, we've taken in too many with no skills at all, and we've taken in, and I think it's also fair to say, haven't we, Mark, just taken too many people?
We do, but I've got a funny feeling that these companies are going to see this as a window to get the certain roles, and they can say we've got X amount of engineers when really they're not really engineers when they market their company.
No, Mark, it's a very interesting warning point, and I thank you very much for it. Matteo says on Facebook, we don't need more immigration. Our society is ever more automated and we are overcrowded. Well, certainly, I've got to tell you, Matteo, driving around the roads last Friday and Saturday around this country, it is a nightmare. Annie says our schools are full of bright young folk. Give them apprenticeships before we look elsewhere. Who knows, it might even keep crime down. Annie, I'm all for genuine trade skills and apprenticeships. I have to say, I'd love to see the government say that our main priority with our people post-Brexit is to make sure we have enough engineers, enough doctors, enough bricklayers, and to give some real hope to people out there that we're actually going to start investing in our people rather than relying, as we've done so often, on cheap labour. Ian says there's no Brexit policy because we're not leaving. The tide has turned, Nigel. Your attempts have failed. Ian, I don't know what you're smoking, but did you see the opinion poll that was out today? Huffington Post published it, done by a reputable pollster, and it showed people were given options. You know, do you want the Chequers deal? Do you want to just leave? Do you want to leave with a free trade Canada-style deal? Remain, Ian, Remain was 16%. All right, now I grant you that it was 25% in one at the weekend. But can we agree, Ian, about 20% of the country want to stay on current terms? That is all it is. The country wants change. That's my view. What does Molly from Chelmsford think? Good evening, Molly.
Good evening, Nigel.
So is it right to end discrimination in favour of EU citizens?
It is, very much so. The problem is with the Tories, especially to his mate. She says a lot, but does she keep to it?
Oh, I know. I'm trying, Molly, I'm trying to be positive, but I must admit, when I heard this announcement last week, the Cabinet had agreed it, I kind of said to myself, I'll believe it when I see it. But at least, Molly, at least the debate is changing, isn't it?
The other thing is, Nigel, people from outside the EU have other stipulations besides their skills. You have to have a certain amount of money to come in, their visa and everything else, which makes it harder for them to come into Britain.
Yes.
Whereas the EU, they come in. So shouldn't these people from the EU have the same stipulations as what the other people
Yes,
have?
no.
A certain amount of money to come in?
Absolutely, and that is what the Cabinet agreed last night. As I say, Molly, I'll believe it when I see it, and I'm sure it's the first concession that Mrs May will make, if a sensible deal is offered, is that there will be special rights for EU citizens. But the principle that everyone should be treated the same is what's been agreed. I see it as I see it in a way, Molly. I see it as a bit of a personal victory. I thank you for your call, Molly. I'm going to go to Glasgow. Jonathan, what do you make of this change of policy?
Hello, how you doing, Nigel?
I'm doing well. I'm pleased that the debate's changing.
Well, I mean, I think you kind of alluded to the point a wee minute ago. But I would say we don't need any more people in this country. There's too many people here. I think the figure somewhere, the population in England's increased by 6 million people since
2001.
Was it
2001. Yep.
That's a mind-blowing statistic. That's a 10% increase in the population.
Mm-hmm.
In 15 years, it's unsustainable.
Yes.
Not only would I say we need to end mass immigration, there's also a lot of high percentage of that 6 million here illegally, or they're not contributing anything. So what I would say is we need to get people out of here first before we bring any more in.
Well, in terms of illegals, Jonathan, I do understand what you're saying. We don't know what the figures are. I saw an estimate last week. It's running at 70,000 a year. Others think it could be as high as 250,000 a year. And, of course, that is not part of a 6.5 million figure that we talked about. Jonathan, you raise an important point. I welcome this change of policy to non-discrimination. But equally, folks, we should not and we cannot go on importing net 300,000 people every year. As Jonathan quite rightly points out, a 6.5 million increase in population since 2001, and you wonder why the roads are so busy. It's tough to get GP appointments, youngsters can't get housing, and it's tough to get your kid into the local primary school. Not only do we need to end discrimination in favour of EU citizens, I believe we must bring the numbers down. Tell me if you agree. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 6:30 and yep, the Cabinet have agreed we're going to end discrimination in favour of European citizens and treat people equally from all over the world and do it based on the skills people can bring. It sounds pretty good to me. Well, it would, wouldn't it? I've campaigned for this for the last 15 years. Before we get back to that and your calls and your thoughts, President Trump today was addressing the United Nations General Assembly in New York. And he began in very Trump style.
In less than 2 years, my administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. America's so true.
So Trump.
Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
Well, that was Donald Trump, and he's never one to exactly undersell what he's doing as US president. But that was the beginning of the speech. It didn't last very long. He then went straight in many ways, to an all-out assault on much of what he thinks is wrong with the United Nations, in particular on their UN Human Rights Committee.
Our ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, laid out a clear agenda for reform, but despite reported and repeated warnings, no action at all was taken. So the United States took the only responsible course. We withdrew from the Human Rights Council, and we will not return until real reform is enacted.
He also went on to say he would not join the United Nations Compact on immigration, that was something countries themselves should decide. And then the bit that I particularly like, given my political beliefs, his comment on globalisation.
We will never surrender America's sovereignty to an unelected, unaccountable global bureaucracy. America is governed by Americans. We reject the ideology of globalism, and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism. Around the world, responsible nations must defend against threats to sovereignty, not just from global government, but also from other new forms of coercion and domination.
Well, that was certainly my kind of line of language. And then, finally, and very fascinatingly, his comment on Iran.
Iran's leaders sow chaos, death, and destruction. They do not respect their neighbors or borders or the sovereign rights of nations. Instead, Iran's leaders plunder the nation's resources to enrich themselves and to spread mayhem across the Middle East and far beyond.
Fascinating that Trump there really saying that Iran are the real bad guys on the global stage. And on the very same day, before Trump spoke, Mrs. Mogherini, who is the European Union's foreign minister, unelected of course, but the foreign minister of the European Union, announced that steps would be taken to facilitate easier trade with Iran. You pays your money, you takes your choice. Either you think Trump's right and they're a rogue state that sponsors terrorism, or you think the European Union's right and we should be opening up and doing more business with them. In conclusion, in years to come, if anybody ever asks, what is the Trump doctrine? What is the philosophy that underpins President Trump's time in office? You saw it today in that speech. His belief that the nation state is the building block, his distrust of supranational globalist organisations. It was all there. It was vintage Trump. If you're a globalist, if you're a socialist, if you're in favour of the EU or the United Nations, you will have hated it. If you're a more conservative type person that believes in the nation state, believes in being tough on immigration and being proud to say you're a patriot, you'll have loved it. Either way, it summed up what Trump is. OK, back to this change of policy agreed by Cabinet last night. I'm really happy with it in principle, although I'm worried perhaps how some of it might be implemented. Tony is a brand new caller to this show and he lives in Rhyl. Good evening.
Hi, Nigel. Or should I say Sir Nigel?
Well, I don't know about that, but anyway.
One day, eh?
Well, not with Mrs. May in number 10, but anyway. So, Tony, I'm welcoming this change of language and this shifting of the centre of gravity of this whole debate.
I would like to see European citizens given a slightly special status, nothing like they've got now, but I think European people are better to integrate than the third world.
Well, hang on. Now, whoa, Tony. I mean, you wouldn't call Canadians third world, would you?
No, I wouldn't, but I'm talking about...
You wouldn't call New Zealanders third world?
I'm talking about South Asian countries.
You wouldn't call Americans third world?
No.
OK. So you're making you're making a point about integration. What do you think the key characteristics are of people who will come here and integrate well?
Well, people, like you said, people that live in a Western-type democratic society. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I also worry about language difficulties.
Yes.
And the validity of some of these people's qualifications.
Yes, you're the second person to raise that tonight. So, Tony, for you, the really important thing here is, however we put this into place, people must be able to integrate into our society.
Yes.
I think that's a valid point. I mean, would you... OK, Tony, let me just try this on you. You know, you talked about South Asian countries. So would you be concerned about people coming in who didn't speak English, who came from predominantly Muslim countries. Would that worry you?
Yes, it would.
It would. So how do we deal with that and deal with it fairly?
Like I say, I think validity of qualification, language test. I think qualifications from Western-style democratic countries around the world are probably far more valid than some of the qualifications you can get popping up from God knows where.
Let me ask you one more question, a tougher question, Tony. Would you support a Muslim ban?
Yes, I suppose I would.
You would. OK, well, Tony, it's a point of view that people rarely air in public. It's one that Trump was accused of putting in place, although, in fact, Obama had said there are 7 countries here, we have to be cautious. Tony, I thank you for your point of view. Well, it's a controversial point of view, folks. I wouldn't support a Muslim ban, but I would say we have to be very careful of people we let in who come from very different cultures. Integration is very, very important. Ross on Facebook says, no special treatment, everyone treated the same. Kevin says, if an immigrant has a job lined up and somewhere to live, yes, they should. I'm a Leave voter, but I know that the NHS farms and care work are dependent on immigration, simply because not many British kids want to work hard. Well, we may have to incentivise and encourage some British kids to work hard, and the best way we can do it, Kevin, is to show them. We had that guy from Bolton on earlier. He said, 2 lads work for me, they're qualified, they got more cash in their pockets on a Saturday night out than anybody else in Bolton. We've got to show people, Kevin, there is a way where they can earn a damn good living by getting qualified in trades and skills. And a similar point Richard makes from Essex, where he says immigration should be the employer-based and the employer's responsibility until the immigrant decides to go for citizenship. And I would add to that actually people coming to do jobs in this country should have medical insurance. We should not be picking up the bill. I believe in that very, very strongly. Let's go to Rajdev, who's calling from Twickenham. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. I'm calling as a sort of, if you like, representative of one of these Commonwealth background, South Asian, actually, peoples that whose ancestors settled here. In relation to your last call, I'm not a Muslim, but part of the Commonwealth. I've worked in the NHS for most of my qualified career in medicine, and I would agree to one point you were mentioning about Indian doctors, for example, and the fiasco about various very much needed specialists, and I will say highlight the word specialist doctors that were attempted being brought in by some of the NHS trusts. It was blocked by the Home Office, which didn't do the NHS any good. That from that point of view, people have been lobbying for a review of those sorts of restrictions on bringing in skilled workers for many years. But I want to, on a wider point, and just to balance this, I would say that in terms of the European migration issue and the amount of jobs that, if you like, Europeans do, you have to look at the symptom of that problem. And it's not just because we're in the EU. This has started from many decades ago. And I would say, why is it that so many or so few British-born people are doing those jobs or even want to do those jobs? It creates a vacuum. And what happens? That there'll be workers from all over the world. At the moment, it's the EU will be filling those jobs.
No. Rajdev, you make the point. You make it very, very well. Another point that is really important is about Lithuania. I've been there. They've lost nearly a quarter of their population since they joined the European Union. And the point that Jamie is making here is actually we've got to stop draining other countries of some of their brightest and best young people. And you know, in Lithuania, it is a major crisis. They've lost so many of their best people. Same goes for nurses coming from parts of Africa where perhaps they're needed very, very badly. Perhaps they're needed even more in some of those countries than they are here. Got to start training more of our own people. If you disagree, call 0345 6060 973. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show. It's 6:45 and the Cabinet says an end to discrimination in favour of EU citizens coming here to live, and it's going to be equal for the whole world. I think the principle is right. The application, of course, will be important. Now, last night I kicked off an auction, and this is for Lunch with Me for Global Radio's charity Make Some Noise, a charity supporting small, brilliant projects across the UK helping children and their families who are living with illness, disability or a lack of opportunity. Last year I auctioned this. We made an eye-watering amount of money for it. You can come. You can bring 2 friends. It's lunch with me. It's a Friday afternoon. I won't be broadcasting that evening if you get my drift. The bidding on this will close at 6:45 next Thursday the 4th. Go to lbc.co.uk. You'll find all the details there. You've got to be 18 to take part. You'll find the other terms and conditions. If 3 of you want to have a fun lunch with me, do it for charity. Go to lbc.co.uk. Continuing this theme, I've got a completely full switchboard. I'm going to try and rattle through a few opinions here. So try and make your points as punchy as you can, please. Michael is calling from Mansfield. Michael, good evening.
Hi, good evening, Nigel. Yeah, I mean, when we obviously the first thing to say, you're assuming we're going to leave the EU, aren't you? That's quite a big assumption at the moment, isn't it, really?
Michael, we're leaving the EU. Even if the politicians wish to betray it, the mood of the country is still pretty firm, Michael.
A betrayal, Nigel. I think the betrayal is people beginning to realise they were sold... what they were sold with the fantasy.
Michael, I know all the lies. All the lies in 1975 in the referendum. It's a free trade club and it became political. 50 years of lies, Michael. Anyway, that's not what we're discussing here. Is it right? If Brexit happens, I'll caveat that given your view. If Brexit happens, would it be right to stop discrimination in favour of EU citizens?
No, I think it wouldn't be right, because I think you've got to look at the practicalities of this. I mean, at the moment, immigration is spoken about as if it's some kind of, it's a bad thing. Actually, our economy is dependent on it. Look at the NHS. The NHS is in crisis. 90% decline.
Anything to do with 6.5 million population increase, Michael, in your view?
No.
Oh, really? No, really, honestly.
If I can just finish with that, you're one of the worst ones for really proposing this kind of smear. I think it probably before this smear that some immigration is putting a drain on the NHS, and it's absolute rubbish. The drain on the NHS is about the ageing population. Most of the immigration is young people coming in. As you well know, those young people coming in, they are not the people consuming the NHS. It is our ageing population.
Well, actually, Michael, in fact, if you go to maternity units or whatever, you'll find that, in fact, they are using the NHS in quite a big way. And, Michael, any link, in your view, between the housing shortage and the population going through the roof?
These people are contributing to our society, a positive feature. It is not a bad thing.
So why not, Michael? Why? OK, fine. So why don't we have another 10 million, 20 million in the next few years? How would you feel about that?
But actually, it's declining, isn't it? What's happened?
No, net migration. No, net migration is still running at 250,000 a year. That against a post-war average of 30,000 a year. It's lower than it was, but it's still huge.
So the trend is down, as these things tend to do. But you've got people like you, as ever, spreading hype, scare. We had it all through the referendum, which came down. Like the Turkey's about to join, all the lies, the bast.
They've wanted Turkey to join for years. Michael, you want to have a broader EU debate with me? You can do that another time. Not now. I'm going to Warwick to speak to Andrew. Andrew, is this policy the right one? Can it be implemented correctly?
Well, I think so. Yes. I mean, if you concentrate on the ability to create value, I mean, if your income is over £30,000, that means you're a net contributor to the exchequer.
Yes.
And therefore, that sort of immigration actually is entirely sustainable because you're growing your economy along with the growth of your numbers. I mean, that's why they say the net value of immigration is slightly positive, because without the unskilled, it'd be massively positive.
Yes.
I mean, if you've got 200,000 of the best science, technology, engineering, and medicine and creative minds coming in, that's a big change from what we have at the moment. I mean, you have to bear in mind that only 50% of people are above average intelligence. What you need is cheaper engineers. What you need, I mean, I've heard you say before that we need to train 1 million more engineers, and yet we're close to full employment, and we have an ageing population.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew, where I think we've gone wrong is I just don't think we've encouraged people to learn trades and skills, and the point being, if they do them, they can actually earn very good livings.
Oh, I agree, absolutely. But the problem is that, I mean, we're going to retrain our sociologists and our historians and things like that. And I mean, I think we should probably also be offering free degrees in science, technology, engineering,
STEM.
medicine,
I couldn't agree more.
that create value.
Do you know what? I couldn't agree more. In fact, in 2015, in the UKIP manifesto, when I was leader, we said remove tuition fees for people doing STEM subjects, because that's where we have a shortage. That's where we're wholly reliant on people coming in to Britain from outside, and it's where people could do very well. Andrew, I thank you. Going to Blackburn to speak to Usma. Good evening.
Hi, Nigel. I just wanted to address a point. A few callers ago, you were talking about integration.
Yes.
And it really, I'm British Asian, and I've born and brought up here. But the integration word really annoys me because it's called white flight, Nigel. That's the term people give it, isn't it? And, you know, so I live in Blackburn, and I've seen it myself, where young, upwardly mobile, modern-thinking Asian people, Muslim people, Hindu people, whatever, moved into what were predominantly white areas. And people start putting the houses up for sale. So integration, I don't think, is a problem within the minority communities. I think people do want to integrate. I certainly do, and I think I'm quite well integrated.
I'm pleased to hear that. But I mean, I've been to Oldham, not very far from you, and I went to a district in Oldham where, and I'm being serious, you know, it didn't seem like many people spoke English. That's not integration, is it?
But integration happens when minority communities aren't isolated. So what's happened in Oldham is, I assume it's the mainly Pakistani heritage people have moved in, you know, the white working class people have moved out. And you will never get integration. And the same is happening with Eastern Europeans in certain places, where Eastern Europeans are moving in, the Asians and the whites are moving out. So how can you integrate if people aren't prepared to live in the same community? And I think that whole, you know, nobody speaks English in Oldham thing wouldn't have happened.
But I didn't quite say that. I said there were a couple of streets in Oldham where, knocking on doors, very few people I met spoke English. Isn't that a point, Usma, that if we have immigration running at sensible rates in terms of numbers, it does make the prospect of integration much, much better?
I completely agree with you. You are right, but integration will only happen when, and this is the whole point, you know, it's all very well blaming small minority communities for being insular and ghettoising each other and whatever, but at the end of the day, the term given is white flight.
No, you're making the point that integration's a two-way street, and it's a point you've made extremely well, and I thank you. And my last caller on this time is very short. Jeff, you've got 30 seconds from Carmarthen. Good evening.
Very quickly, Nigel, just that your immigration figures are completely wrong. Tony Blair had 158,000 in 2002. It shot up to 313,000 under Theresa May in 2014 and 333,000 in 2015. Double under Theresa May's when she was the Home Secretary than it was under Tony Blair's government. So just thought you'd like to know you've got your figures wrong, and that's probably why...
No, Jeff.
Jeff, about you lying to people.
Jeff, matey. 6.5 million increase in the population since 2001, and 82% of that directly down to immigration. 82% of it. You can argue it's a good thing, you can argue it's a bad thing. Please, Jeff, don't tell me those figures are wrong. They're right. You're listening. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show. I'll be back tomorrow at 6. At 10 tonight, it's Tom Swarbrick. Up next, it's Ian Dale.
Nigel, thank you very much.